Hi, I'm Kristina Lee, and welcome to the second of the 3 video series from my conversation with Fred Karpoff on piano technique. Here we focus on 2 foundation concepts, the quiet hand and alignment. Please like and subscribe, and come back for the 3rd video where Fred covers vibrato technique. So the first concept I talk about in my Piano Technique 101 video is the quiet hand. Where did that term, the phrase, come from?
You know, I don't recall for sure. I do recall reading a book by Madeline Bruiser, I think her name was. Now, I had already had some experience with this, probably from working with Fred Karpoff. I just don't know for sure. But I do remember there was a line in Madeline Bruiser's book about, look what happens if you raise a finger even a millimeter off of the keys when you don't need that. And just, I think the idea was to allow it to rest. Now that was probably much after that I had sort of come up with, I always talked about the quiet hand. I remember at my job, it was in my 2nd year, so my first year of going through recruitment, actually. So that means it was my first year. The student came in my 2nd year. So I remember it was a student from San Francisco, and she was originally from Turkey, pardon me. And she, I just remember that we accepted students via cassette tape at that time, just like back in the day when I interviewed, I had 1 live audition and 1 I sent off to another school that was just a cassette tape. And so anyhow, I listened to her tape, and I could hear a talented voice in there, and I remember we wanted to accept her, and she came. Coming from San Francisco to Central New York was a big deal. So she comes to her first lesson, and her hand position, I kid you not, it was something like this. In other words, yes. If the keys are here, and she could not, and I think this one was also curled, the 5th finger.
Yeah.
And so they were all up, but it was, let's see, I always remember it was kind of like this.
Yes.
It was really quite astonishing. And I remember that by the end of her first semester, which is about 3.5 months, her position was something like, if I can make the thumb loose, it was kind of like this, which I viewed as a tremendous victory at the time. Yes. because this finger was quite curled, and it was about like this, and the other 3 she could keep quiet, and of course, and she improved from there. But having students like that, is an incredible blessing too. But it's because you could see how, and she could see very quickly just how much effort she was putting forth to have that kind of position, and so you can retrain the neural pathways, but you have to develop memory, kinesthetic consciousness, I guess I'd call it now, kinesthetic awareness. So your original question, where did it come from? I honestly don't know. I just started referring to it as the quiet hand because that seemed to be, I remember when I made the first video project, 3D piano, the quiet hand, of course, is one of the foundations, the foundational concepts. And by that time, it was codified. And my students would, imagine, I've viewed other pedagogues. Some of us have more jargon than others. Mine, they call those bowling balls, actually, like in marketing and storytelling. You don't want to give people too many bowling balls. Well, I think the biggest bowling ball of that I tend to espouse is when I talk about the vibrato technique. I think the quiet hand is so self-evident that it's something that becomes something similar to common sense. I remember I had somebody attend my lesson with Veda Kaplinski one time and said, isn't she great? And well, yeah, she is, but a lot of it kind of hits me as common sense. And I thought about that because in a way that's true. When you get past through the dogma or whatever it is that we've all learned, or sometimes it's by accident, as I said in another answer to you about I couldn't tell until after my injury that I had been holding this arm out as opposed to following the natural alignment when you do this, there's the coracoid process is right around here. And if you think about military figures, imagine them, a sergeant punishing a private, they'd say, and they'd say, hold this, they give them some heavy paperweight to hold like this. It's a kind of torture. Well, so here we are, if we're doing something like this, you're holding out as opposed to just following the natural alignment without introducing excess tension. That's, mostly it's not that we play with zero tension at the piano because we would just fall off the bench, but there has to be just the right amount that's needed to stabilize, to activate muscles, and to then allow them to rejuvenate, as we said, with using opposing muscles in alternation, as opposed to using them simultaneously in this kind of curled fashion.
And actually, that's one of the questions that I got from when that video went viral. Like, tell me more about quiet hand. How do I use this? What, can you do a webinar about quiet hand? So can you say it, because you're the originator of Godfather of Quiet Hand, what quiet hand is and how it transforms our approach to our body and our relationship with our instrument?
Sure. First of all, I guess my disclaimer should be that I don't claim ownership over it, but thanks for the sentiment.
I'm the official voice.
More important is how can it help whoever's listening to this, and because this is really the easiest concept, so I should hold myself to what is the simplest way to say it. So if I had to, you've got to say it simply. The quiet hand is a simple concept, and it basically is that when you are at the piano playing a note or a chord, so let's say any between 1 and 5 fingers being engaged, that any other finger that is not needed is allowed to rest on the surface of the key that it happens to be over, in alignment. So again, as I answered in another question, imagine that you're playing, well, let's actually imagine playing across your midline. I know we're not demonstrating right now, but if I went over this way, you can actually see that my hand is not, I'm not trying to keep it straight oriented toward the keyboard. It's aligned with my arm, if you can, it's hard to see in this view. And so
like this rather than like this.
Exactly. Excellent.
Like this,
and so when you're going in that direction, you can maintain the quiet hand over whatever the notes are that, if I'm playing my thumb below middle C, it might actually be easier for alignment to play with the second finger, right? The second finger could be easier to play across your midline. But if that's the case, let's use that as an example. Play the C below middle C with your right hand, with your second finger. Allow your thumb to be off the surface of the keys, and the other 3 fingers just resting wherever they are over the other keys. I would say that it's possible that at that point, your third finger would be in a little bit more on the D, if not over one of the black keys. And then the other ones, you could easily see, doing that experiment. So that would be one example of that. An easier manifestation would be to take the same hand and put it 2 octaves up. So 1 octave above middle C, you can actually place all 5 fingers over, let's say, C, D, E, F, and G in pretty good alignment, because your arm is at your side. But once again, you can test the quiet hand with any combination of 2 or 3 fingers, and it may be more challenging. For example, it's much easier to play 1 and 5, the open dyad, than it is to play a chord 1, 3, and 5. That is a coordination issue for somebody who is first starting out at the piano, because there tends to be a sort of pulling on this, and there you use the opposing muscles that may send one of these other fingers up, as opposed to allowing them to just rest on the surface of the keys. So once again, the quiet hand is just only utilizing the fingers that need to be used, preferably with a lift and drop that's coordinated with the rest of your body, as opposed to just your fingers. But in any case, once there's just enough weight to keep the key down, the other ones just rest on the top surface of the key.
Fred, as we're talking, I'm also refining, the understanding of these concepts. And one of the things that I really did not emphasize in my videos or a lot with my students is the unused fingers, the quiet of unused fingers. I talk a lot about the starting position and ending position and transitions. But I really appreciate you, bringing that into my attention as well today. You said alignment a lot, and this I think is after I did my 3 technique videos, at the end of it I said, because there's a lot, right? I mean, we can say, well, you do this and this and that, but it's a lifelong commitment of practice. I used to hate this word practice, but no, I love this word in the sense that we are in it, we're journeying with it, and we are living with it. And we don't achieve it really necessarily, right, at any point in our lifetime. And but I said the 2 things I think are the most important if people just have to focus on 2 things: the quiet hand and alignment. And you said alignment multiple times today. Help us understand what alignment means for a pianist.
Okay, yeah, first there's some good things to unpack even in what you just said. But if the alignment, I would say, is another really simple concept. And I actually am tempted to tell a story. So
do tell us the story. Why not?
Okay. Well, it was an interesting debate with a partner that I had in the music field, because in terms of pedagogy, there are those who believe that alignment is somewhat of an advanced concept, or that teachers would get confused by this. That was actually said to me by someone I was working with. And I thought, I was working with then at that time a very young 5-year-old, very talented one, that there are actually a number of videos of me working with this young lady who, in something we did a series called Teaching Little Hands. And it was easy this is so easy to actually demonstrate. And if you use kinesthetic transference also, in other words, always asking your student, is it okay if I move your hand this way or whatever, then when you move it around, they can experience that so easily. Alignment is, let's see, I'm going to back my chair up a little bit, it's following the natural. It's not just the contours, it's the actual. I mean, when I was young, there was a thing about, there was some song about anatomy, about how, the knee bone's connected to the something bone, the da 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 da. Yeah, there's head, shoulder, knees, and toes too. But I mean, there's natural alignment, which is how do we sit at the piano? That's job 1, is where we sit. So alignment goes to your whole body, right? So where you sit on the bench, the distance from the keyboard, your height of your bench, so that the angle of your upper arm, or I should say of your forearm, becomes optimal, upper arms hanging freely at your side, and then extending out to your hands and fingers, being in alignment as opposed to being twisted, which happens, as I gave an example earlier, most prominently in middle C methods, where there has not been sufficient understanding by the authors or whomever to take alignment into consideration. And so especially, I know until not long ago, I actually don't remember which one it is now, but I remember when I would give talks about this, that there were method books that were still saying things like, fingers that are different lengths aren't ready to play. And then they'd show a picture like this, of a nice, open, relaxed hand, and then they'd say, fingers that are the same length are ready to play. Oh my goodness! You talk about the bad old days, and the bad old days. It's like they're right now, and so I don't know if those method books are still being out there.
They're
They're still around, yeah. At least you can find them, but hopefully they're not getting the same prominence as maybe better what the next generation is of thought. So that would answer the alignment issue, is following the natural movement. And I know natural is an overused word, but it really means the organic movement that is not, that you don't have these overlays, these artificial overlays of things like making all the fingers the same length, which cause all the other problems, including the ones that lead to the 3 major causes of injury.
Yes. So, earlier in our conversation, you talked about the twisting, right? And, of course, we talked, you're talking about middle C position where you're playing like this, broken right here, the alignment. And I mean, this is why I do talk about the alignment, because a lot of times in piano playing, people do play like this or like this for longer passages than really necessary, because they don't, the common sense is not common, so they don't realize it. And this is why I just think, yes, there are other things that are important, but if you fix that one thing, a lot of times the other things will kind of follow as a natural consequence of this foundational concept. Sometimes YouTube watchers, viewers say, oh, well, you can't use that all the time, about certain concept I talk about. And I do think like there are passages, in advanced classical literature where we do have to go outside of the alignment because of a certain fingering. But the way I explain to my students is that, but don't stay there. As soon as you're done with that, I even allow my students change certain passages to allow more of a healthy movement if it looks very, difficult or worrisome in terms of injury issues. So would you say that that's actually true? As you get more advanced, there are exceptional times where we try to come back to the foundational concepts that we're talking about?
Well, actually, this would be a place where I found that, because right now, I have a new course it's called Mastering Intermediate Technique, but it actually is concepts that apply to all pianists, including advanced. It's just that it's demonstrated through over 80 repertoire examples of the intermediate repertoire. And intermediate, we know, is a very large thing. I mean, it's by far the most people who study the piano are actually intermediate pianists. Even those who actually have played 1 or 2 or maybe even 5 advanced pieces, they're not really they're true whatever, if they had a chess number or a Go, the Eastern game of Go or something, rating. And that's nothing to disparage anybody. It's just that we have so many things that we're studying as a musician and as a pianist that to really be able to learn music, it just doesn't mean just playing one piece. And so in that, I found that I've become, I wouldn't say rigid, but there are certain things it's like, no, actually that's not negotiable. In other words, sitting is job 1. The quiet hand is non-negotiable, really, because there's no reason not to use a quiet hand. Having good alignment is really also pretty much non-negotiable. But does that mean there aren't exceptions that happen? And because we each have individual anatomy. So, I mean, I've met somebody who had a particularly long third finger and shorter 2 and 4 and really short pinky. I mean, it's possible. Anything can happen. Yes. When my daughter went off to a piano camp, that must have been 15 years ago, the choral accompanist actually only had 2 fingers. I'm not kidding you. And she could accompany, so she gave great. So here was somebody who, so there are going to be exceptions. Now that's a wild one, of course. Yes. That's certainly an outlier. But I would question even the premise that we have to do it, because there may be a creative solution. Yeah. Some of the works of Liszt, for example, I think of something like Valet Doberman, I remember, has 3 notes in a diminished 7th arpeggio, maybe like D, F, G sharp, and then the top D and played that in a tremolo, and that's really uncomfortable. You still have to use what I call the vibrato technique to move in and out. And for some hands, like I actually had one student who had quite a large third finger, big person.
Yes.
And so those people have to, and he had to curl his finger back to actually play it without playing something else.
Sure.
There is another solution for that, by the way, when you're playing between two black keys and you have a fat finger, you can play in a sort of downward forward motion, and you're less likely to get both of them.
I see.
But if you have anybody who has
that was one of the main questions.
Fingers.
That was one of the main questions I got on my YouTube video too. Yeah.
For a large fingered pianist,
yes.
yeah, I mean, they still, I mean, everybody has individual anatomy, so there may be specific problems, but as the default for alignment, I just don't see any reason why we would, it would be more than a brief exceptional thing, and even that in practice, you would want to choreograph it carefully, because you'd want to know that's where you're going, and if you can do that in a way that's not going to stress any of your tendons or muscles, that's going to be ideal.
And you're bringing up something very important, which is that everybody comes with a different anatomy, and so it actually, because of that, it's even more important to understand the concept for its concept, not for the legalistic aspect of the concept, like you have to move a certain way, because each person has to find what works for them, right? And hopefully they have a capable teacher as a guide, or a video like ours. Earlier you talked about kinesthetic transference. Tell me more about that.
So kinesthetic transference, I think, is a powerful pedagogical tool. And I really try to guide my own students who are going to become teachers to do that. And then the teachers that I work with, I encourage them to use it. Okay, so what does it mean? It actually means hands-on, literally. And so in our age, we have to be especially sensitive to that first. So we need to understand that the intention is to help you. It's just like I'm working with a physiotherapist right now at a Pilates studio. And he goes around the room and he makes adjustments to everybody's body. He hasn't asked, but we don't care. We're all like, it's fine. But we're often working with younger people too, but whoever. You always want to respect that person completely. So the first thing should be said at the beginning is it okay if I move your arm around? Or in some cases, I've also told my students, is it okay if I play on your shoulder or your arm? And I usually, it's just that it's usually moving the arm around, and often I will have a student, I'll say, place your arm on mine so that they feel the sensation of what it's like to move with a good three-dimensional motion. The body has its own intelligence. And when you can share that, and it's so immediate, it's so exciting, because I've watched this happen hundreds of times. I mean, it made my teaching so much more immediate and effective. And I could see, and they're like, oh, I get it. And a lot of people say, pardon me, that they'll say, I'm not very kinesthetic. Well, even the people who don't think they're very kinesthetic, I find that they are. I can't even remember somebody who wouldn't respond at all. That there wasn't improvement. For some people, it's as immediate as it was for my daughter with riding her bike. So that's what kinesthetic transference is. Oh,
I love that. And I had a teacher who used that when I was in high school, Deborah Dewey, and I've used with my students. And it's not just the technique. It also helps with coordination. Like when students are having really hard time getting the hands coordinated, and because actually the lifting of the right hand and left hand in different positions, that is something that is not talked about very much, but it is really crucial to the intermediate level. I mean, beginner as well. And it's amazing how I love how you said the body has its own intelligence.
I think it's in every cell. We were taught when we were young that the intelligence lies in the brain. And there are others who talk about that you have three brains. You have your brain, your heart, and your gut. And I think that's much more accurate, but I actually believe that we have intelligence in every cell of our body.
Absolutely.
And so it's really no way around it. So yeah, I do believe that it's important. I think it's extremely important for beginners as well. But actually, all levels of pianists. I mean, you did say something earlier that I did want to comment on about how we all study really perpetually if we are committed to our music and expressing ourselves at the instrument. But I did think of a nuance about that you can achieve a level of learning that is where things do become more automatic. And what I mean by that is maybe you've heard about the 4 stages of learning. That you have your unconsciously incompetent. That's where you don't know what you don't know. So that's okay. But the toughest stage for everybody is when you're consciously incompetent. You know you're not very good, and that's where people usually give up because it's so frustrating. And that's with whatever it is. If it's tennis, if it's piano, it's you fill in the blank. Learning a new foreign language, you have to work through that stage because that's the place where the greatest learning takes place. Then you become consciously competent, and that's where you know what you know, and you're pretty good at it, but it's not kind of automatic. But then when you get to the stage of unconscious competence, that's true mastery. So so that does happen. It doesn't mean that you don't still have to work. You don't still have to learn notes, as people say. Although I don't know how as a teacher how many times you've heard people over the years, they'll say, well, I just want to learn the notes and then I'm going to put the music in it. I always got a kick out of that if a student would come to me at university to say that. It's like, you might want to integrate that from the get-go because it's actually quite a bit easier to do that when you're cultivating sound, and that's why technique is important. I remember I had a mentor, British pianist, concert pianist, I met in the 1980s and took some lessons with, and he played a lot of recordings, including, I remember playing the late Beethoven sonatas performed by Dame Myra Hess. These are treasured recordings. I remember when Philips came out with the 50 great recordings of the century or something, that Dame Myra Hess's late Beethoven, Opus 109 and 110, were included in that. And so I remember the last movement of Opus 109 was quite hypnotic, and his comment was, and see, that's technique. And I didn't understand what he meant at the time, and because we tend to think of technique as something that's dry or it's something that you have to do. It's kind of like how a lot of people look at Bach. They think, oh, you have to play your Bach just like you have to play your Hanon, of course, and you have to play your scales, and it's very limiting to think of technique that way. When it's integrated with you can have a beautiful session playing technique